Hello. Our guest in the chair today is Tom Knox, the Head of Emergency Planning at North Yorkshire County Council. Tom is at the EPC to give a talk tonight entitled Academics versus Practitioners. Tom, welcome. Where do you stand in this debate?
My background very much is a mixture, but I'd say my starting point was the view of a practitioner, a frontline police officer. Having said that, my background is that I studied a business degree at Manchester University and then joined the police after that. So I've always had a keen interest in frontline practice, but also the debrief process and how we can learn when we've dealt with a major incident or an emergency, and how reviewing what we did we can learn and move forward and embed better practice. And I think that has brought various challenges, and my experiences are that it isn't always as it maybe should be.
Were you unusual as a young police officer in having a university degree?
I'd say it wasn't the norm, but certainly from my particular intake there was a couple of others who had a degree, and I certainly think that things have progressed from when I joined in the early 90s. But at the time, I certainly wasn't exclusive, but I suppose my background was slightly different.
You'd acknowledge there was some suspicion, perhaps, on occasion, some hostility not to you personally, but perhaps to the idea that people with an academic background were trying to tell people with a lot of life experience in the field how to do the job.
Yes, I would hope anyone who got to know me, it would be dispelled quite quickly. I think successful police officers are people orientated, and they can deal with people at whatever level, be someone who's had a bereavement or physically having to deal with someone who's causing problems. And I think that skill level can come from whatever background. But I would certainly think old school officers who've maybe come through the traditional way and joined the police force, I certainly would say until they got to know me, they might have had a perception that if I had a degree, that I wasn't going to be up for it.
You understand where the skepticism comes from, do you?
I do. I think it has very much changed. I think it's a generational thing, and I certainly think nowadays that police officers come from all sorts of backgrounds, and a lot of them have got degrees in various subjects, and really it's the life experience that makes a good police officer. So yes, I do. I understand that people may have had that perception, but I certainly think that as soon as they got to know me and saw how I could operate, that I could bring something maybe different. And maybe the talk today will be that sometimes we have to challenge our perceptions, and the perception of me joining with a degree, that I wasn't up for it, or I would be looking not to get my hands dirty. I think that suddenly changes.
What about this field that is, which you're involved in now, emergency planning and emergency response? Where do you still see some friction between the practitioners and the academics, or is that now a thing of the past?
I don't think there's any distinct camps, but I certainly think there's probably a lack of understanding on both sides. If I set my stall out, I would say that I am very much a practitioner, but I have an academic background, and I certainly see the merits of academic studies. And I think we need to have a marriage between the two parties and move forward together. I will speak tonight about some of the conflicts that I've experienced and some of the lack of understanding. I think what we need to do together is to really embed lessons learned. So when we have debriefs, when we have a report about a major incident, it doesn't just stay in the report. It's got to be something that is practical. It's got to be understood. And very much, in my view, is that it needs to be on a personal level. The officers who are going to deal with the incidents next time need to understand what they need to do personally and why it's important and how they're understood.
Isn't that one of the recurring themes of the inquiries that have been held after successive emergencies or crises in this country, that we never seem to learn the lessons?
And we can see that and say, that is the challenge that we have. And I find that in some ways it's quite exciting. In other ways it's quite tragic that it's taken so long for us to embed lessons and understand them. Certainly the Pollock report highlights 32 different incidents that have really registered with the public psyche. And I think the report goes through nearly all of them and comes up with recommendations that haven't been embedded. I think that signals that there is a misunderstanding, and that it is pointless listing what needs to happen next time or a change of system if the understanding of why it didn't work and what were the experiences of those frontline officers and what would they need to do. And for me, it needs to be simple, it needs to be embedded through exercise and practice, and it needs to be as near enough to second nature so that if you're under pressure, if you're in the middle of a situation, something like the London riots, you won't have clarity. It's really hard to think, you know, I need to do that next. What you need is to have exercised, to be ready, and to keep it simple, and to know what you're trying to do.
But isn't what you're saying, you're talking about it ought to be second nature, isn't the other way of developing that second nature through experience?
Yes,
practice?
yes, without a doubt. So that begs the question, for our debriefs and our academic studies, is there a dialogue? Are we learning, or are we going away and in isolation are we coming up with solutions? And I suppose one of the challenges is there. So yes, we do a debrief report, but are we ensuring that we're listening and then we're going back and saying, would this work and how do we do this? So there needs to be the dialogue, there needs to be the stimulation provided by academic study and the expertise and the time and the effort and the resources to do it. But I think that needs to be embedded on the front line so that officers understand. And obviously Jessup is a way forward, and it's a driver, and you do have, you know, the blue light services who are going to train together, and they will have this interoperability and understanding of what they should be doing and what the others are doing. That is a way forward, but I think it's only the start of what we need to do.
You were telling me earlier about an incident when you were a young plainclothes police officer, I think, on the ground, involved in a hostage situation. Just recount again the details behind that story.
I remember it distinctly. It really had an impact on me personally. It was a Saturday morning in January in 2003 in Gateshead, and I was a plainclothes officer, and I think my thoughts were, what was I going to do that day? And I went down to the cells and seen who had been arrested overnight. It wasn't very exciting. And then across the radio came a message that there was a man with a large knife running amok in Gateshead town centre. My immediate thoughts were body armour, jacket, and I went into the town centre and I saw the male, and he was wearing a very distinctive yellow shirt, and I immediately registered that it was someone I'd dealt with 2 weeks previously, and that individual had been badly beaten up, and I'd dealt with his case, and I had been able to engage with him and build a rapport, and I felt that I'd been very supportive to him. However, the tables had been turned, and here he was with a large knife under the influence of substances, and he went into a newsagent's shop, and he actually held a lady at knife point. What I did then was to go to the door of the shop, and for the next 35 to 40 minutes, I was solely focused on trying to talk to the individual, reassure the lady in the shop, and build a rapport. And my thoughts were concentrated on stopping that individual hurting the lady in the shop. And when I realised and pulled back, someone tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned round. During the time, I'd been so focused on what was happening in the shop that there was 4 or 5 armed officers. The whole street was empty and cordoned off. We had police negotiators behind me, the press and media were there. And at that time, it was my job to step away, to introduce the individual, the offender, to the negotiators, and I moved away. And that was very traumatic, and probably 40 minutes of the most traumatic experiences of my police career of 20 years. And I remember afterwards the debriefs that went on were for the armed team, the uniformed team that was supporting. I'm sure even the shopkeepers had their own right debrief, but my debrief was in the canteen, and it was a DCI saying to me, well done, big man, you did really well this morning, and that was as far as it went, and that was a shock. And later in my police career, I got a few acknowledgements and a few awards, but for something that was so intense, and it's probably not too dramatic to say it was maybe life or death, and my role was crucial, I was never thought of as part of the debriefing.
So the organisation gained no benefit at all, other than the resolution of the incident on the day, from your experience? No ongoing benefit?
Certainly not from my experiences, and they were important. It might have been the 40 minutes before everyone else turned up. I'm sure the armed teams had a debrief, I'm sure the uniform did, but I was never part of it. And so in many ways the organisation lost out. I lost out personally. I debriefed with my mates later. That was the only solution for me. But that was an early indication that things weren't as positive and constructive as they could be. And I think I always took that with me, that I was going to make sure that if I learned from an experience, be it negative or positive, that afterwards we could have constructive debriefing and we would learn and move forward. And I've always taken that in, and I talked tonight about various experiences with Northumbria, which is a great force, but again, frustrations that we didn't do things as well. And in many ways, when I went to the Met Police, again, do some things really, really well, and others, we could do so much better, but that is life. You always learn.
These things get squeezed out, don't they? They get squeezed out by something else that comes up in the next hour. We've always got operationally something else to do, it seems to me. And at a time when local authorities like North Yorkshire are going through, undergoing enormous financial pressure, being asked to save quite a lot of money every year, what it seems to me is that you're asking yourself and members of your team to engage in a whole raft of additional work, additional responsibilities, additional ways of thinking about their job, which may be a distraction from the day-to-day operational stuff.